Without a doubt, we live in difficult times. And it's in times like this that we need inspiration. We need God to speak to us and reaffirm the purpose of life, humanity, the purpose of our very life. Why are we alive now, and why should we get out of bed today? And the Old Testament book of Ecclesiastes, written by King Solomon, the preacher, the son of David, gives us the meaning of life. Let's delve into it together. Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verses 12 through 18 finishes out the chapter. It says this in the New American Standard Version. I, the preacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem, and I set my mind to seek and explore by wisdom concerning all that has been done under heaven. It is a grievous task which God has given to the sons of men to be afflicted with. I have seen all the works which have been done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and striving after wind. What is crooked cannot be straightened, and what is lacking cannot be counted. I said to myself, behold, I have magnified and increased wisdom more than all who were over Jerusalem before me, and my mind has observed a wealth of wisdom and knowledge. And I set my mind to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I realize that this also is striving after wind, because in such wisdom there is much grief, and increasing knowledge results in increasing pain. Right? That sounds like wisdom's emptiness. What is Solomon trying to say? Well, he's saying that nothing is actually understood. Solomon, the preacher, king over Israel and Jerusalem, said he set his mind to seek and explore by wisdom concerning all that has been done under heaven. End quote. What is different from the beginning of the chapter? Wisdom, under heaven, and striving after wind are new in what he's talking about in chapter 1. Wisdom under heaven and striving after wind are new ideas in chapter 1. The result is that striving after wind, which is mentioned twice in this paragraph, just as under the sun defines Ecclesiastes' message, so does striving after wind. Striving after wind is in fact used in verse 14 and verse 17. In chapter 2, it's used 3 times. In chapter 2, it's used in verse 11, verse 17, verse 26, the striving after wind. In chapter 4, it's used 3 times. In chapter 4, verse 4, verse 6, and verse 16. And then in chapter 6, striving after wind is used again in verse 9. So striving after wind is definitely new and changes the message. What does striving after wind? What does that mean? It's very poetic. Well, striving after wind means futility, unsatisfied desire. That's not a positive message. Striving after wind really means unsatisfied, futility, wasted effort, if you will. Wisdom. Wisdom, fool, knowledge. In Old Testament Hebrew, wisdom is chakmah. It means a practical understanding by observation. Wisdom. Wisdom is very practical, hands-on. Wisdom leads to pleasing God. The opposite of wisdom is foolishness. If wisdom is practical application to life, then foolishness is godlessness. Wisdom is constantly contrasted with foolishness. Showing a contrast, the psalmist tells us the fool says in his heart, there is no God, right? Psalm 14. To be foolish is to be irreligious, to be godless, to have no reverence for God. And yet wisdom and knowledge are also different, distinct terms. A person can have unbounded knowledge and not have wisdom. Knowledge is understanding. Knowledge is truth. Knowledge is theory, but not necessarily the application of the information. Think of it as knowledge is head ideas and wisdom is practical use. In verse 17 of chapter 1, wisdom is contrasted with madness and folly. In verse 18, wisdom parallels knowledge. The last two verses really do contain this parallelism where these two ideas are walking hand in hand, where they're connected, compared, and contrasted. In verse 17, to know wisdom is contrasted to knowing madness and folly. And in verse 18, in much wisdom there is much grief, is compared to increasing knowledge results in increasing pain. It does kind of sound like blessed are the ignorant. I mean, you do know there's nothing worse than knowing the practical application of something and being surrounded by people who don't know that. Or to know a truth and be surrounded by people who don't know the truth and don't want to know the truth. It is difficult and reaffirms the idea that, it is a little easier being ignorant. This last passage in Ecclesiastes chapter 1 is difficult. In the end, all this talk about wisdom and knowledge, what is the result? What is the application? If wisdom is application, what is the application? Well, it's found in verse 13. It is a grievous task which God has given us. To think and expect that life is fair, good, fulfilling, and ultimately worthwhile is deceptively foolish. It's immature and naive. Life is not fair. Life is grievous. Life is evil. Life is miserable. Life is distrustful. Life is injurious. We should not expect fair treatment, social justice, brotherly understanding, outward assistance to survive, or personal fulfillment at worldly achievements, rewards, and successes. Everybody who feeds you that kind of nonsense is lying to you. Ecclesiastes tells us the opposite. Goodness, justice, understanding, help, and fulfillment cannot be found in life or in community or in ourselves or in the world. It can only be found exclusively with and from the divine. Only God provides virtuousness. Only God provides fairness. Only God provides support. Only God provides joy. Only God provides contentment. Praise the Lord. We must realign our focus, our source, our expectation off of the world and on to God. That's the result. That's the application. We need to be looking for these things, not from the world, but from God. And it'll make all the difference in the world. This topic is incredibly important. And we need time to think about the purpose of our individual lives. Why do I exist? And how can I make the most of the time that God has given me? If you're interested in delving into Ecclesiastes deeper, then I wrote a book in 2018. It's 50 pages. It's $1.98 on Amazon. It's for a Kindle, an e-reader, and it's called Search for Significance, an examination of Ecclesiastes. And I will put the link to this book on Amazon in the description below as an additional resource for you if you wish.